Well, welcome back to another episode. This time it's the news that some, but probably not all of you, have been waiting for. The EV Range Rover is coming to market. Pre-orders have already started for 2025, and it's going to be based on the long wheelbase version of the regular 5th generation Range Rover. Now, I know a few of you will be looking at this thinking, okay, so we've got plug-in hybrid, the diesel is still there, where's the demand for the EV? Well, the demand for the EV, that's actually been colossal. 25 or 26,000 pre-orders made on a car that hadn't even been driven yet. I think I know why. I think there's a lot of people out there that have Range Rovers. They've not been able to buy diesel because previously they were buying them through companies or however they were doing their purchase, and for whatever reason they can't anymore. But the plug-in hybrid didn't serve their needs, and so the only option left is electric. And Range Rover have recognised, or Land Rover have recognised, that demand exists, and so they've been long in the development of this car. There are quite a few differences though to the regular model, which we'll get into in just a second. The first thing I need to talk about though is pricing. It's going to be, if you're watching this in the US, probably somewhere around $150,000. It may start a bit shy of that, say around the $125,000 mark, and then keep stepping its way up. Bearing in mind, it's based on the long wheelbase model, so you can't just look at the base regular wheelbase model and say, oh, it's quite a lot more expensive. You need to look at the base long wheelbase model and see how it fits in that lineup, and it will keep stepping up the lineup. I'm pretty sure that over time they will have probably a $200,000 model, because they'll offer it in some high sort of either Westminster or probably even higher specification than that. That will be in time though. What they're trying to do at the moment is deliver on the pre-orders that they've already had. For the UK, we're going to be looking probably similar prices numbers wise to the US. So I wouldn't expect it to be under £110,000. I think realistically it's going to be more like £125,000, stepping up from there. That will disappoint some people, but then if we know what the current price of Range Rovers is, it won't surprise them. The interesting thing is that there's been quite a lot of development on this car, and one of the things that they've been trying to get absolutely nailed down is the mile range that it's going to get from it. They want to get to a WLTP figure of 300 miles. Okay, that'll be about 450 kilometers, or 500 kilometers, if my maths is serving me right, which I think it is, of range from a battery. That's what they want, the target WLTP figure. Now, bearing in mind, the EPA usually gives a slightly lower figure than WLTP, so there may be a push in the next sort of final few months to try and get that range a little bit higher. But interestingly, looking at the testing that's been done and all the different criteria that it's had to meet to become an EV, I'm starting to think actually it may be able to do more miles than that. I think they're going to give it its harshest possible score, and it's sort of marking a sea change with EV mile testing, where previously we've had, yes, in the absolute best conditions, it may be able to do 300 miles. Manufacturers now have realised 300 miles is actually very important to people, so let's make sure we can actually deliver that in the real world, and let the testing be what it is. And some of the interesting interviews that I've seen with the engineers at Range Rover and at Land Rover have said, yeah, this car will do a real 300 miles. That means if you're going to use it on a highway or around the city, well, you're going to be able to get that mileage from it. Battery pack size is something that I don't know yet. Not at the time of recording this video. I don't think it will be released prior to releasing this video either. I would be very surprised if it's less than 100 kilowatt hours. I think it's probably going to be more like 105, 110. Just knowing where the competitors in this market sit, I think that's the battery pack size we're going to be looking at. From power-wise, it's probably going to be power up there with the 4.4 V8 turbo model, because they can pull that out of it. So that wouldn't surprise me at all. The interesting aspect of its specification is this new multi-link suspension. So because they're coming in with this sort of skateboard design of a battery pack, that's actually a little bit unfair of me, but I'm just trying to simplify how this engineering process has been done. They clearly sort of had this idea at the beginning when they first were designing the 5th generation Range Rover, that it's going to have sort of a skateboard-ish design battery pack go underneath it, and it will, mold to the chassis a little bit. Interestingly, if you look at the plug-in hybrid model, just in the middle of the chassis, you can see a slight dip where part of the battery is sort of hanging down slightly. So there has been some compromises. I'm guessing whenever you've got a chassis that's trying to do more than one thing, you can stress it and find that you're going to have to make compromises. I don't mean stress it, by the way, it's going to snap in half. Although I'm sure people have already commented under this video that they're all going to break and catch fire and everything else. The point here is that you're trying to get a design team to be able to do more than one thing with the car. You see that a lot when saloons and estates are made, but usually the design team and the engineering team are working from the ground up. And really, you're changing the roof line. You're not changing the underside. In this case, we're going to be changing, or they're looking at changing, parts of the underside to make sure it can fit, along with the suspension articulation. That's a big factor here when you've got motors and you're having to control each wheel's power through a motor. It's different to how, the conventional way of doing it, I should say that. And so because of that, yeah, it's going to have a unique multi-link suspension. However, in testing, for the most part, people are still saying these are still prototype vehicles, but what I'm hearing is that it still feels like a Range Rover. And I think that was the biggest challenge for the entire team here. It'd be very easy to make this car and end up with something that just felt like every other EV. And that would certainly erode some of its market, because if you're looking at buying a six-figure EV that's big, there's loads of them. You can buy the G-Wagon now as an electric car. I'm sure there'll be some of the other sort of legacy manufacturers will follow in that way. BMW clearly with the I range and iX range will do that. And of course, there's seemingly a never-ending supply of cars coming from China, which are trying to meet every corner of the market. And we can't forget the US, because they're the kings of large vehicles. And because when you're able to sell such large vehicles all the time, you're able to stuff in massive battery packs. I think the Hummer EV is sort of up at 200 kilowatt hours. If you compare that to, say, if you go at the Volkswagen ID3, I know not all of you will get them, so ID4 for some of you, you can get that with like a 60 kilowatt hour battery. Okay, the Leaf, because a lot of people will get the Leaf. You can still buy a brand new Leaf with something like a 45 kilowatt hour battery. Bearing in mind they have discontinued it, but they're selling off the last ones right now. So it just puts it into perspective how massive some of these battery packs are getting. With that, there's a weight penalty. So of course, the Land Rover team are having to sort of say, well, there's got to be a trade-off. I would be surprised if they can keep the weight under 2.5 tons. I think, from what I understand, we're going to be looking at more like 2.6 tons. Before people criticise that figure as well, so my old Range Rover, I had a 3.6 TDV8, and that weighed 2,850 kilograms, so 2.85 tons. Okay, so I'm not going to be, if they go to 3 tons, that'll be ridiculous, and that will be a heavy vehicle. But if they can keep it below what the heaviest Range Rovers have been previously, with the big V8 diesel engines in them, I don't think we can criticise. Yes, it's heavy. Well, so is every other EV, and it's not even the heaviest. If it isn't above 2.85 tons, then it won't even be the heaviest Range Rover they've ever made. So, I think the plug-in hybrid model is actually about 2.55 tons, something like that. So that puts it into perspective. If you're taking the engine out and adding more batteries in, if they can keep it around that weight, yeah, I think that would be fair enough. But we'll have to wait and see. Now, you haven't seen this because of the way I've edited the video, but actually I've gone away and I've come back to add in a few extra, just to clarify some of the details, because we know a little bit more. To 117 kilowatt hour battery, it's 2.8 tons, okay, of weight, and it is still targeted at 300 miles range or above, 562 brake horsepower. So pretty much everything I've said earlier is now all but confirmed. Basically, Range Rover have said that in some representatives for the Range Rover brand have said that in some recent, as they're sort of leaking this car out and showing bits of it to people. So that's what we know about it. I wouldn't be too critical of it yet. I know some people will be, because they'll say, well, just buy it with a diesel. That's the one that will last forever. And I get it. What you have to remember is, and sorry, I said pricing earlier. It's going to be exceptionally expensive in the UK, just as a sideline. Okay, I don't think the UK is possibly the mark. Well, I don't know actually, but £170,000 is where it's likely going to end up. Possibly with something around 150, but 170 is probably where it's going to be. Say in the US, those prices I mentioned earlier are a little bit more likely, so around $140,000. You would expect the UK to get something around 125 just by looking at the currency conversion, but we're not going to. So there we go. At least at the launch, maybe that will come to follow. And you have to remember that cars generally in the US do get priced very competitively because it's such a huge market. So yeah, can't blame Land Rover for that. Clearly they've had to go in at a price point over there, which they haven't had to here. And as I say, I think a lot of people want to be critical, but remember, there's people out there that have to have an EV because their work demands them to, because their company lease scheme demands them to, because they own their own business, and there is such gigantic tax advantages that, look, I didn't put them there, you didn't put them there. The rules are set by the people. You just got to play the game. And if you're out there and you've had an EV and you've been knocking on the Land Rover dealership and saying, look, I would buy one of your cars, but you don't have anything I can buy, it's here. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, then consider subscribing. There is a buyer's guide, by the way, on this channel for the third generation, the second generation, and the fourth generation. And there will be a buyer's guide come up for the fifth generation soon. So if you like Range Rovers, then subscribe and like the video. And I'll see you in the next one.